evening and welcome to the first of two candidate forums hosted by the Alleghany Highlands Chamber of Commerce and Tourism. This evening's forum features candidates for the State Senate's 25th District. We appreciate each of you taking time out of your day to come be with us this evening, and we thank the candidates for their participation in tonight's event. My name is David Creigh, and I'll be serving as your moderator for this evening. We appreciate Clifton Middle School for allowing us to use their facility. We would like to thank Charlotte Williamson, Anita Prophet, and Derek Barr for serving as our review panel, and Ingrid Barber for serving as the timer this evening. We also want to thank the Covington Women's Club for co-hosting the forum, and we hope that you will join us for light refreshments at the conclusion of tonight's event. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our candidates. Incumbent Senator Creigh has represented the 25th District, which spans from his home in Bath County to the city of Charlottesville in the Senate of Virginia since December of 2001. Prior to his service in the Senate, he served as a local prosecutor and 10 years in the House of Delegates. Senator Deeds currently sits on the Courts of Justice, Privileges and Elections, and Transportation Committees, and he chairs the Joint Subcommittee to study mental health services in the 21st century. Senator Deeds is a lawyer in private practice and lives in Bath County with his wife, Shabbat. Elliott is the independent candidate for the Virginia's 25th State Senate District. He is a criminal defense and civil rights attorney, having graduated from the University of Virginia and Washington and Lee University Law School, both located in the 25th District. Harding was born and raised in Charlottesville, where he currently lives with his wife, Elaine. Now, we have a few rules for this evening's forum. All questions must be submitted to the review panel. If you have a question, go see the review panel. No questions can be asked from the floor. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer each question. We will rotate the order in which the question is asked. Ingrid, wave your hand, there you go. Ingrid will raise her hand when you have 30 seconds remaining and will stand when your time is up. At the conclusion of the forum, each candidate will have 3 to 4 minutes to present statements about your candidacy and explain why you are running for the 25th District State Senate seat. So let's get started. First question will be for Senator Deeds. This question reads, we have a lovely trail for hiking and biking, the Jackson River Scenic Trail. Perhaps you have been on it. Bottles, cans, plastic, food containers, etc. blow from the highway onto the trail. What can you do to prevent littering and motivate people to dispose of trash properly?
Well, thanks to the Chamber of Commerce for hosting us, first off. Glad to be here. I think the last time I was in this room, I was speaking to a bunch of 7th and 8th graders about a wide variety of issues they asked. Littering and recycling is an issue everywhere. Part of the problem with our recycling is that we just don't have the markets developed for the reuse of a lot of materials, so there's not the incentive that people have had in the past to be able to dispose properly of recyclable material. Just about everything is recyclable if we want it to be, if we do it properly. How can we get people to quit throwing it on the ground? You know, we've raised penalties. I guess you lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. We've raised the penalties. We've got one that's a Class 1 misdemeanor, one there's 2 forms of littering in the Code of Virginia. One has a minimum $500 fine. A $500 fine, judges don't like to impose that on somebody who just tosses a cigarette butt or a bottle or a can out the window, but they haven't in some cases. We could raise penalties, but what I'd rather do is find incentives for us to recycle material. I don't know that we can go back to the days where we offered deposits for bottles. You know, years ago, when I was a kid, I walked up and down 39 and 42 looking for bottles and cans, or bottles that we could trade in for 5 cents or 3 cents for a deposit. But there aren't too many merchants that want to put up with that trash at their store anymore. We've got to do a better job of developing markets for recyclable material, including plastics and glass, aluminum, and everything else is subject to waste. And litters the highways and litters the trail. I have been on the trail. I was there for its dedication. And I think that once that trail is extended into Bath County, there's no reason why it can't be a huge asset for this area.
How y'all doing tonight? Thank you for doing this. I really want to thank the Chamber of Commerce and the Women's League here in the area for hosting this evening. Thank you, Senator Deeds, for doing this evening. As far as the question is concerned regarding the litter in the parks, something I would note is I do agree with the idea of incentivizing folks to clean it up. There have been times in more urban areas, higher density areas, where folks who are seeking funds, seeking a few dollars here and there to be able to get by, you see them out there cleaning and being able to get those nickels and dimes and quarters to be able to add up and hopefully, clean the streets and make do. So whether it be in a rural area or a high density area, I think it's something that folks should be able to do. And as far as reducing the plastics and aluminums and things of that nature, I also think we might be able to incentivize these local gas stations to have a catch-all, something like that, a single stream source where even they could possibly serve as a repository for these types of things. So as folks go through the trails and pick it up, they can go to these stores, and stores won't say don't come here. They'll actually be inviting them in and rewarding them and saying, thanks for stopping off, because the state might provide an offset. I'll also note that up in our area, up in Albemarle County, in Charlottesville, there's a regional jail up there where folks are able to work, while they're there before they re-enter, they're able to work off their court costs and fines by going around the area and picking up litter and picking up trash. And that's something that I think that all regional jails should be able to offer as a program. Folks, it's somewhat similar to a work release, but they're not going to a full-time job. They're working on behalf of the local community to be able to keep it pristine, keep it clean, maybe monitor the public lands as well, not just the parks, but also maybe your courts and the schools, to be able to make sure that there's not trash and litter around there too. So I think that's something that should be offered in every regional jail as a way to offset these court costs and fines by going out there, cleaning up the trails, cleaning up the public areas, so you're not coming out with such a burdensome debt once you're finally released.
Okay. Mr. Harding, this question is for you to start with. Governor Northam seems unambiguous regarding his stance on abortion. Would you support legislation limiting abortion and/or defining birth?
I think birth is defined. Birth happens when a child passes the birth canal into the world. So, insofar as the state defines it as anything other than that, I think that would break far outside any type of medical norm or just reality of biology as far as birth is concerned. I think what the governor said up on the I think it was WTOP radio program, and what Kathy Tran was pushing, I think those are abhorrent positions to have. I think they are extreme. Because I think I saw the poll that something around what Governor Northam was advocating for, if taken to its fullest extent, only like 70% of the country agrees with something that strong. The idea of a child being born and then being subject to anything other than life-saving care is wrong. Now, insofar as life is concerned, I'm very concerned with the direction that the Commonwealth is going to go if the General Assembly flips this next term. I'm not going to go so far as to push for bills like Georgia and Alabama at this point. I want to see how the law plays out. The Supreme Court has spoken on this issue, and I'm not looking to become the third or fourth state to try to get a bill before the U.S. Supreme Court. I do think that our bills right now could be strengthened in a way that incentivizes folks not to have unplanned pregnancies. One thing that I think the federal level should do is consider over-the-counter birth control to be available. It's not right now. I think that's a bipartisan solution that folks would be open to seeing, and I'll do my best as a state senator to work with our congressional delegation to make sure both parties in Virginia and the delegation can push in that direction as well.
glad we had this question early. We can get it out of the way. The governor misspoke in many respects this past winter. The bill was overbroad. It included provisions that weren't necessary, and I'm not confident that the person who introduced the bill even read it. That being said, that bill didn't pass. It wouldn't become the law today, and wasn't going to become the law this past winter. I'm pro-choice. I think the woman and her doctor need to make the decision. The third trimester provisions that bill spoke to, the reason why it was overbroad is that 2011, at the latest, was when a third trimester abortion was even performed in Virginia. It's something that doesn't occur here. It doesn't occur often. When a child is born, you call it a birth. There's no such thing as an abortion after birth. So the governor just misspoke or was taken out of context. Now the good news is, nationwide, just about every state, the number of abortions has decreased. You've got a 40-year decline, the lowest number of abortions we've had anywhere in 40 years. And part of that is because birth control is more available than it's ever been. Part of that's because of the Affordable Care Act. More birth control is more available. But there are also some other issues like fertility and just the lack of births. There's been a slowdown in growth nationwide on births. So that bill wasn't going to pass. It didn't pass. I wouldn't have voted for it. But I am pro-choice.
All right, Senator Deeds, this next question will start with you. What are your views on legalizing marijuana?
What are my views on legalizing marijuana? You know, I've practiced law for 35 years. I've represented an awful lot of people for possession of marijuana. I prosecuted for people for possession of marijuana. I've got two of my kids live in states where marijuana is already legalized, in Alaska and Oregon. I've also spent a little bit of time talking to legislators in both Colorado and Washington. More important than talking to legislators, talking to the financial analysts, the people that put the budget together that can tell me how it was done out there. Washington and Colorado are the two states where legalization has probably been the most successful, and it produces between $250 and $340 million a year annually in revenue to the general fund budget. And that still amounts to about less than 1% of the total revenues, but that's significant. The most encouraging news in Colorado is that legalization has not, you've not seen an increase in the number of young people, minors, using marijuana. So that's encouraging to me. I would put marijuana, if I were the king for a day, I would put marijuana in the same category as alcohol and tobacco. I don't think it's necessarily harmful, but I don't think it's a great and wonderful thing. I think I would prefer to decriminalize it, to take it out of the criminal courts, and take it off of people's criminal history records. But I would also prefer studying, taking the approach that Washington State and Colorado took to make sure that we can, if we legalize it, we can do it properly. And here there are a couple of big issues. Number one, you have a test, a blood test or a breath test to determine what impact alcohol is having on a person's ability to drive. You don't have that for marijuana. When a person drives with marijuana, what does it mean for them to have a certain percentage in their blood system? We haven't developed that. The science hasn't developed that far yet. And the second issue is, what do you do if you're an employer and your employees come in with marijuana in their system? If it's legal, is it all right? I mean, there are a couple of issues we still have to figure out. So I would propose decriminalizing it and studying legalization.
Last year, Virginia arrested 29,000 people for a 20-year high, no pun intended, on marijuana arrests. It cost us $63 million to do that. The odor of marijuana is the #1 cited source in all police reports as to the method of investigation during a stop on the side of the highways. Whether marijuana is found or not is irrelevant as to whether or not they can get in the car and conduct a search. Meanwhile, had it been legal in Virginia, we would be seeing upwards of $200 million in revenue. I believe that marijuana, insofar as cannabis is concerned, it should be legal, and the revenues should be directly appropriated into our schools, our mental health system, and our criminal justice system. Marijuana use is a nonviolent crime. It has proven to be not a gateway drug, but an exit drug for people fighting the opioid epidemic. Colorado has seen nearly a 40% reduction in opioid-related overdoses since marijuana has been introduced into their system. It severely helps, it helps significantly with folks with anxiety and our veterans with PTSD, yet they cannot use it in a medicinal way either. It has proven to help people with, glaucoma and cancer and people that can't have an appetite. It's helped people with their seizures and epilepsy. Children, across the board, it has medicinal components, but it also is, the pendulum has swung so far as the criminalization of this substance. I think that we could easily regulate it, and in the way that we don't know what we have flooding the streets right now. Washington, D.C., for example, has full legalization, and you're seeing things with false chemicals coming in, people using it thinking it's one thing and it's not. Unless the government does create this system and regulates it similar to tobacco and alcohol, but also recognizes the medicinal component of it, that a doctor can have that decision. So unlike tobacco and alcohol, it actually has a beneficial purpose. I think it's something that Virginia needs to do. I think those revenues could offset a significant benefit, a significant cost in Virginia where it will serve as a large benefit. Now, do I think marijuana is something good that should be done just for fun? No, I don't think it's something that should be abused. I think we should use those revenues to educate. We should use those revenues to subsidize our community health services, to fight addictions of all sorts, and ultimately it should be used to subsidize our criminal justice system in a lot of different ways.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harding, you'll start out this next question. We have an economic drain in our community. Some of our highest paid employees, doctors, industry leaders, for example, do not live in our community. What can you do to encourage those earning the higher incomes to live in the community where they work?
I think most people want to live near where they work, but they ultimately make the decisions where they live very often based on where they want to send their kids. I think our school systems are a major driving factor in where families lay their roots. I saw today, I think the State Board of Education listed all the schools in Virginia that met full accreditation and those that did not hit full accreditation. I think there are around 9 in the 25th district that did not meet it, 2 in Alleghany and 1 in Covington. I think that folks have had this debate about merging schools in the Covington and Alleghany area. I think that is a hot debate that the locality should decide, but the state needs to provide everything possible to allow for that to happen if that is the decision that the 2 municipalities choose. And I think that can potentially serve as a very beneficial outcome, and thereby drive people into moving here and expanding their roots. I also think that transportation is another factor, getting to and from Roanoke on the 220 side. I think a lot of these folks that work up here but maybe live in Rockbridge or live down in Botetourt and even near Roanoke or even in West Virginia, I think we need to make sure that they feel like they have an easier access to commerce. And so I think some people want to live closer to maybe Lexington or closer to Roanoke. And if we can drive up commerce here in the Covington, Clifton Forge area where they feel like they can go out there and have a good time and have that recreational time and have that family time, it's something that will drive people in wanting to live where they work.
One of the things that's driven me for a long time is the knowledge that this community has lost population every day since Hercules burned in 1980. We have so much to do, and I don't disagree entirely with my friend here. Part of it is building up the catalog of amenities that we have in the community. I remember many years ago when the Alleghany Regional Hospital went through a renovation, and I talked about how that was from an economic development standpoint, it was important to do everything we could to make our community as livable as possible. So what we do there, what we do with the Masonic Theater in Clifton Forge, what we do at Elliott State Park, what we're doing in downtown Covington right now, anything we can do to make the community more livable is going to make people want to live here, because people live in Botetourt or Lewisburg or Lexington because they want to live there. We have to make this community more livable. And that, I think we have the nuts and bolts for doing that right now, right here. But we have to have a strong healthcare system. We have to have a strong school system, educational system. Covington, Alleghany County, we have to have a strong school system. We have to support our state parks. This Jackson River Park we were talking about a couple of questions ago. You know, I remember when the railroad stopped carrying people up to Hot Springs, the Alleghany Central was an excursion train that did that route for a few years. You know, that's the sort of thing that I think can ultimately bring people to this community. We have to continue to look for ways to make this community more livable, and you do that, you're going to find more people here. Let me go back to marijuana for 1 second, because there is one other problem I neglected to address, and I want to be clear about this. Marijuana is still listed as a Schedule I narcotic at the federal level. As long as it is, no matter how many states do it, no matter what they do it subject to whoever's in the White House. Whoever's in the White House can change federal policy on marijuana enforcement. And so all those states that have legalized it have done so, they've kind of taken a chance. You know, my guess is, looking at the number of states that have done it, you know, it's all right for us to look at that path too. But we have to be careful about the way we do it.
Okay, Senator Deeds. The state had a budget surplus this year. That money is being partially returned to taxpayers. Do you agree with that? And what would you have used that money for?
I don't necessarily agree with the way the money was used. I mean, surpluses, I've been in the General Assembly for 28 years. I've seen surpluses, I've seen shortfalls. I'm afraid we're getting ready to go through a rocky period of time the next 3 or 4 budget cycles. And I'm glad that we put a chunk of that money into the rainy day fund so that we'll have some stabilization in the next cycle or two. I would, given that, I would have preferred to put the money in K through 12. I think while we raised teacher pay 5% this last time, and that was the largest increase that we made in over 10 years, we still haven't funded local education at our pre-2008 recession level. We're still millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars below where we were in 2008. So I would have preferred to put the money in K through 12 education. I think that we could have. I think when we shorten our funding for K through 12, it puts more pressure on local governments. Puts more pressure on your local real estate tax rates. So the $110 you're going to get for your tax return, in my view, I would have preferred to put that in education.
I do agree with the returning of the funds to the taxpayer. It's the taxpayer's money, and $110 can be a significant payment for a lot of families in Virginia. I mean, that could be groceries for a week. You know, that could be a cell phone bill and for the family that would have gone otherwise unpaid. That can keep the utilities on for a month. I think that it's a significant return. I also think that the surplus is a byproduct of the tax cuts that came out of the federal level. And I think that, as you saw with the tax cuts at the federal level, unemployment has gone down, jobs have gone up, and quality of life has gone up for most Americans. I think that Virginia could take a lead on that. And rather than finding a unique way to use the surplus and just spending it, I think we should be also taking a lead and looking at where we can potentially cut in Richmond. And yes, K through 12 is very important, and there are ways to drive new revenues to subsidize K through 12 that don't require withholding people's tax returns in the surplus. I think that just general taxation, increasing people's income taxes is something that folks up in my area are trying to do when they make it to the House of Delegates. Again, I'll emphasize 36 days away, you will see your taxes go up if the Democrats take the majority of the Senate and the House of Delegates. So when you get this $110 in your mailbox, you should, I would say, go deposit it, but also take a picture and frame it, because that'll never happen again if November 5th goes in the wrong direction. You'll only be giving more money into Richmond, you'll be seeing government grow, and you'll probably be a lot more concerned as to how it's being used and the inefficiencies it's creating. So I agree with returning it, and ultimately I think people should keep more money in their paycheck by having lower taxes in other ways as well.
Okay. Mr. Harding, what is your position on the so-called red flag laws? What does the law allow now without adding additional laws?
Okay, so that's a two-part question. So as to the red flag laws, most of the ones that I have seen, so first of all, that's just a name. That's just a name to get to any law. I could call any law a red flag law, but it matters what's the substantive component of that law. Most of the ones I've seen I have real issue with because of due process concerns. The idea of restricting someone's fundamental liberty to protect themselves in their home by going in and taking their firearms without them having been adjudicated as a potential threat to themselves or others, or shown any sign, granted any other traditional components of due process such as representation, and having their notice and a hearing first really concerns me. I also think the idea of putting our law enforcement into a situation where they're going into somebody's home and confiscating the firearms because there's a potential threat of violent force is not only going to compound the threat to the individual that's being targeted, but also to the law enforcement themselves. I think that there's a more prudent way of going about it. Now, what the law currently does, the system that we currently have, it depends on how you want to look at it. So if you want to look at protective orders, most subjects of protective orders will lose their firearms, but not all of them. Not all of them. I think it's about 6 to 9 different sorts of protective orders. You do lose your firearms, but I'll note that a protective order, you've had an attorney. I represent folks in protective orders here all the time. You have a court, you have notice, you have a date, you have the ability to subpoena people in there to be a witness for you or against you. You can cross-examine, and your due process is respected. As far as a potential mental health issue and someone posing, whether it be a risk to themselves or to others, we have emergency detention orders and things like that at this point where folks are going in either voluntarily or involuntarily and going in and being transported to mental health facilities. So they can't bring their firearms with them in this circumstance. I mean, involuntary commitment is something that exists. So the idea of taking someone who's potentially such a risk to themselves or to others and not, involuntarily committing them, but instead taking away their firearms and creating this risky scenario without due process is not something that I would be in agreement with. But if we can provide all the protections that the Fifth Amendment requires, I'm open to seeing that put into legislation. But it's a much higher bar than what we're seeing discussed on the national media right now.
Of course, we're not talking about the national media, we're talking about Virginia. Right now, if you're a felon, if you've committed domestic assault, if you have been subject to a temporary detention order, that means that you've already been found to be a danger to yourself or others, or unable to take care of yourself, you lose your firearm. If you're also subject to one kind of protective order, a permanent protective order, you lose your right to possess a firearm. Red flag law has nothing to do with mental illness. The red flag means that somebody in the law enforcement community, a magistrate or a family member, has gone to not a magistrate, I apologize, a law enforcement officer or a family member has gone to a magistrate and then to a district court judge and shown that there's a red flag that my husband or my brother is as mad as a hornet right now, and he's threatening to shoot somebody, he's got a gun, he's going to do something. A red flag bill is a temporary removal. If they could establish that, it's a temporary removal of a firearm from the home. I think there have been 18 states that have passed those laws. There are only 2 studies that have anything to do with the results, show anything to the results of those laws. And what those studies show, and I think one of them's out of Connecticut, maybe the other one's out of Florida, they show that the laws have dramatically decreased the number of suicides by firearm, because the data shows that people that want to commit suicide, they develop a plan to do it, and they're going to do it by gun, or they're going to do it by knife, or they're going to do it one way, the way they're going to do it. They don't replace that way. So you take the firearm out, you reduce the number of suicides by firearm. Number 2, it's also decreased the number of domestic instances that escalate to lethal violence. So I've supported, and the Virginia, the proposal we've made, and I support it, is one that would allow for the red flag law to become law, but only if a person's rights are protected by having a due process hearing before a magistrate that can be appealed to a district court judge. So the person has the opportunity to be represented by counsel and meets any objections that have been voiced.
Okay. Senator Deeds, what is your position in regard to the increased fuel tax for areas that are near Interstate 81?
Great question. You know, and one of the greatest accomplishments of Virginia government in the 20th century was the creation of the Virginia Department of Highways in 1925 with a 3-cent gas tax that was paid for by everybody. And it allowed for the creation, the development of a state highway system. It meant that highways went to poor counties and rich counties. It allowed for economic development all over the state. Well, that was when Harry Byrd was the governor, 1925. 1986, when Jerry Blouse was governor, that plan was supplemented by an increase of taxes that was also statewide. The plan, though, and by the late 90s, we were running out of money. And by and the feds at the same time have allowed they've allowed the Transportation Trust Fund at the federal level to run dry as well. So projects, if they're going to be paid for, have to be paid for with state dollars. 2013, a plan passed that said improvements can happen in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, but the taxes for those improvements have to be raised in those areas. Well, that was the only thing that was out there. So that passed. But what that meant, it cut us off from the wealthiest parts of the state. What that meant is that when we wanted improvements in our part of Virginia, we were on our own. So I voted for an increase. I knew we were going to have to do something on Interstate 81. And we passed the plan this time that resulted in a gas tax increase of 7.7 cents, I think, in the planning districts that touch Interstate 81. But we know this too. Interstate 81 carries 41% of the truck traffic that travels through Virginia. Nearly every product that's purchased in the counties, Highland, Bath, and Alleghany, that I represent, that don't have Interstate 81, nearly every product that's purchased comes up 81, one way or the other. We know that 81 is an unreliable system. So the plan that passed wasn't perfect, but it was a plan that I voted for because I felt like we needed to get something done on the interstate. I would prefer to have a statewide system again. I would prefer for us all to be in this together because that's the only way for it to work for us. But in 2013, decisions were made that cut off Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. If you go to those areas now, work on the interstate highways is paid for when you buy gasoline or toll roads, or if you're buying property up there, you're paying a higher recordation tax. We don't have that.
I'm not generally as supportive of the idea of hiking up regional gas taxes on folks that don't touch 81. I got to deal with the law that as it is now, though. And so what I would do as your next state senator is I would go into the General Assembly and fight for 3 to 4 of those cents that are coming out of Alleghany, per gallon, coming out of Alleghany, Bath, and Highland to go back into those non-81 counties and subsidize other infrastructure development to take care of 220, for example. Because if I'm going from here to Highland, I'm not going up 81. I'm taking 220. And I think that if the taxes have already been levied, at least some of that needs to come back home to take care of, whether it be 220, it could be taking care of any 64 growth that's ever needed. It could be other roads just in the area. Now, as far as gas tax and getting our fair share of the Commonwealth, I agree. I think that it should be more uniform in that sense. I don't like the idea of having to rely on some regional allocation. And then you look at the map, Bedford County has to deal with 81 all the time, but I don't think they were in the scope of it. And there are other counties along that are adjacent to 81 that didn't have the taxes levied, but here in Alleghany, Bath, and Highland, they did. And these are some of the areas that can't really handle that. I view that gas tax as a tax on rural America, because who pays more for their tractor, who drives more in order to get to their amenities, people that are in low-density areas, people that have more fields. And so I'm not a big fan of that, particularly for the 81 and more western rural areas of the Commonwealth. And I'll also note that there are ways I would do my best to fight for alternative ways of revenue generation. I know that there was a time when folks were talking about disbanding the ABC and using any license and profits of that space to be earmarked particularly for transportation. That's something I would be open into seeing, or other forms of new market development in Virginia so that the revenues are particularly driven towards transportation funding.
Okay. Mr. Hart, what is your position on the support for the arts? For example, the Alleghany Highlands Arts and Crafts Center brings in over 6,000 visitors to the county. These customers also visit other businesses in the county.
As far as the state level subsidization of the arts, art's a broad topic, right? I mean, you talk about an arts and crafts festival, or you can talk about massive monuments. You could talk about arts in our schools. You could talk about a lot of different things. I love these festivals. Going up to Highland, you've got the Maple Festival, which rapidly increases the amount of people there in the county in one day and is a huge revenue driver. I know that's not art necessarily, but you've also got the Masonic Lodge, and you've got or the Opry. You've got arts and culture up in my area, up in Charlottesville and Albemarle, are very popular. I mean, I would argue that Albemarle and Charlottesville are the artistic and cultural leader of Virginia. So something I would like to see is I would like to see the Virginia Music Hall of Fame put in the western portion of Virginia. It doesn't exist right now, but I think it's something that we could really feature and promote people from this area. You can look at folks like June Carter up in the north, and Patsy Cline, and folks, and then in Charlottesville area, you've got folks like Dave Matthews Band, who's more contemporary. Really feature the growth and featured artists here in Virginia, and then serve it as a venue where the profits can go in and subsidize our arts programs in K through 12. Use it as a way to drive tourism and growth. Look at a place like these old manufacturing buildings and these old warehouses like in Buena Vista. You've got that plant that's sitting right there on the Maury, where that's a massive facility right off of 81. The state could easily go in there and consider featuring some type of tourist artistic attraction. Now, as far as local arts and crafts fairs, I think that that's something that the localities and the chambers and the contributors and those who actually do the artwork and do the advertising and the marketing, I think that's something that should be left up to them. I think that they probably have a much better pulse on what drives people to their various festivals. But I do love them. I think our portion of the Commonwealth, I think the western portion of the Commonwealth has the best festivals. And I think, this time of year is one of the best times for them. And so I look forward to seeing everybody at a few of them over the next few weeks throughout the district. But I don't think the state needs to be throwing out massive grants for something like this.
I just want to make 3 points on 81 before I talk about arts. Point one, the weekend before we took the vote on that tax bill, the Alleghany Highlands Chamber of Commerce had their event in White Sulphur Springs. I gassed up in Covington because I knew gas tax was, 9 cents higher in West Virginia. I gassed up in Covington. When I got to White Sulphur Springs, the gas price was exactly the same as it was in Covington. There's so much profit in the middle part of the gasoline market that they absorb a whole lot of the additional costs, and that's proven with point two. Point two is 2 weeks after the tax increase went into effect in this part of the state. The tax in Campbell County, which is below Lynchburg and wasn't subject to the increase, the tax or the gas price in Campbell County was 7 cents higher than in Bath County. How much sense does that make? It doesn't make a lot of sense if we're actually paying gas tax. Point three is we compete for state transportation dollars with projects all over the state and district. The Interstate 81 projects have more urgency about them because they've got more traffic. You know, if by creating a separate pot of money for Interstate 81, we make it more likely that counties like Highland, Bath, and Alleghany can get state dollars for other projects because we don't have to compete with 81 anymore. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Okay. With respect to the arts are a driver of economic growth. It's important that we continue to fund the arts, and we probably need to increase our funding. We know that in every part of we talked a little bit earlier about making our communities more livable, making them places where people want to live, want to come to. The arts is a big reason for that. On a night when there's a big show at the Masonic Theater, the restaurants are full in Clifton Forge, and you've got a lot of extra people in town. You see the same thing over in Lexington with the Lime Kiln Theater. When they have shows on the weekend, you see lots of, you see the same thing in Charlottesville at the Paramount Theater and the other concert venues they've got there. The arts is an important part of what we do. It's an important part of the economy. And as I see it, it's an important part of our educational system. You know, kids that learn instruments, that participate in arts, discipline their minds, and they become better students, and they achieve at a higher level. The arts is an important part of our life, and so I support funding for it.
Okay, next question. This is for Senator Deeds. Starts with, can the General Assembly provide state funds to equalize salaries of Covington City Schools and Alleghany County Schools if they were to create a joint school system?
You know, and I don't disagree with a whole lot with what my friend said earlier about that. Those decisions about whether Alleghany and Covington are going to put their school system together need to be made by the leaders of Alleghany and Covington. You know, and if you make that decision that the best interest of the children of this community will be better served by one school system, I'll do what I can if I'm reelected to help you put the money together to make sure we equalize salary. But you know, there's no guarantee we can do that. I can tell you that in 2000, when Clifton Forge was trying to give up its charter, when Clifton Forge and Alleghany County were putting their school system together, and my partners were Bo Trumbo and Jim Schumer. We did not tell anybody what to do. We said we worked together to find ways to create financial incentives for you once you decided what to do. And that's where I stand with the merger talks. I think efficiencies can be created. I think that the central question, not unlike a child custody case, is how can you best serve the interests of the child? What are the best interests of the child, of the children of this community? Can you create a better school system together than you have separate? That's what it comes down to. Not, too often we live in silos. We want our silo to be the very best. And we don't want to cross silos. We don't want cross-pollination. Well, in my view, we just have to think about what's best for the kids of this community. And once the leadership of this community makes that decision, I want to do the best I can to support it.
I think we're in significant agreement on this issue as far as who should be making this decision and you know how it should be done. And I think honestly how the role of the state senate would be, and that is to make it facilitate that merger if that is what the localities agree with, and if funds are needed to offset the growing pains of fusion. I think that that's something that would be appropriate for the state to come in and help with. One thing I'll note is if this were to happen, and that's the hypothetical, that's the initial premise of the question, is if this were to happen, you'd have infrastructure vacancies, right? You might have some schools that open up and one of the localities is going to sit there be owning it and have this empty space. Not all of them, but you might have a few that open up. I would be a huge proponent of having the state then come in and whether it be through private enterprise or state tenancy, rent that property for skill development in the region, and then have those revenues given to the localities to potentially go in and help stabilize and raise the salaries within the system. Because when you have these open, large school plans, and in my area in Albemarle, one of the elementary schools shut down a few years ago, and they didn't know what to do with it for a while due to just based on student population, and it sits there, I think, right there on Red Hill, or on Yancey. And so, ultimately, I think it would be appropriate in this area to push skill development, turn it into a place where folks are going in and increasing vocational skills, whether it be through the reentry system of folks coming out of prisons to make sure they don't have recidivism, people that are in, not being able to gain employment, so that our local manufacturers